Contradictions of the Green Energy Initiatives with David Blackman. David is former El Paso director, former FTI director, and frequent writer in Forbes.com. Good morning, David. Thanks for being here with us today.
Good morning. Good morning. Happy to be here.
Thank you very much. David, alternatives to fossil energies are very welcome, of course, but it seems that they have not sufficient or enough capacity or quantity or flexibility to replace fossil energy at this time. But what do you think about this?
Well, yeah, and that's true, and it's become pretty starkly obvious in Europe over the past 6 weeks or so. Companies like Germany and Great Britain have, over the past decade, tried to accelerate their transition from fossil fuels by just retiring their natural gas plants, mothballing them, and coal plants, and building a lot of windmills and generating most of their electricity with wind power and to a lesser extent solar. But then this summer, for whatever reason, and I'm not a meteorologist, I don't really understand it, the wind basically stopped blowing in Europe. and so these countries, and it's not just Great Britain and Germany, it's a dozen of them, got caught short on capacity, because when the wind doesn't blow, the windmills don't turn and no electricity is generated. So they've been scrambling here since August to reactivate all those mothballed natural gas plants, and now they're reactivating coal plants because they can't obtain enough natural gas, to make up for the failure of wind power to do what it promised it could do. And that's happening all over the world. Wind power is promising to do things it can't do, the wind industry. And this is the consequence of it that we're seeing in real time in Europe right now.
And how the market is so strong? What's the reason alternatives are so strong?
Well, in the United States, and I don't see it in the rest of the world, but I know in the United States, the entirety of the U.S. news media and entertainment industry and the entire Democratic Party have all coordinated a massive propaganda campaign related to green energy for more than 20 years now, really, since the late 1990s. They all sing from the same hymnal and talk from the same talking points and propagate the same messages. So it puts an enormous amount of pressure on policymakers to, when you have a prevailing overarching societal narrative that is permeating the airwaves every day and the halls of Congress every day, it puts a ton of pressure on policymakers to do whatever these green energy industries ask them to do. And we see that right now with this gigantic $3.5 trillion budget reconciliation bill that has upwards of $1 billion in additional subsidies for these already heavily subsidized industries, because they have an extremely effective lobby and just the most extraordinary propaganda campaign really in American history. And I assume it probably has also been happening that way in Europe.
That's right. And in Europe, you have the problem is that Nord 2 is ready to run from Russia to Germany. And
right.
the license, they do not have license to operate. And so it's a contradiction for the energy.
Right. Ironically, they're waiting for the EU, which all of these countries, except for Great Britain, are members of, to approve that final permit of what is probably the safest and most modern pipeline on the European continent, right? And the politics behind that are a mystery to me. But I will say that it is completely consistent with the green energy agenda to make the cost of fossil fuels as expensive as possible, because that is how they plan to make wind and solar competitive in the marketplace, by raising the cost of natural gas and oil and coal.
And at the same time, the United States, are there enough gas to supply for the winter that's coming?
No, they don't have enough. And, Russia has at least allegedly artificially cut back on its deliveries into Western Europe since August. And Putin has been out over the last week or so promising to deliver more. And that has, mitigated prices here in the US somewhat. But, the amount of gas that can be exported to Europe from Qatar and from the United States has limitations. You only have so many gas tankers. And frankly, in the United States, if we have a cold winter, we're going to have a hard time supplying what we need to heat our own homes in the United States. And so that's putting negative pressure on LNG exports from the United States to Europe and Asia. And so Europeans cannot rely on LNG to really make up for their lack of supply. And the other part of that is that they've done, that these governments have done, have outlawed hydraulic fracturing and drilling for their own natural gas resources, which they do have in Europe. And so that is another policy decision that was, at least at best, premature, and at worst, really dumb. And they're paying the price for it now.
David, at the same time, the oil companies, the big ones, majors, IOCs, they are scared with this pressure.
Mm-hmm. Sure.
They fear social punishment. Every day, right, the media is going against them, and the fossil who has fossil portfolios are suffering some kind of pressure for that. And,
yep.
In Brazil, our last bid round last week, from 92 blocks offered, only 5 was bought. Only
wow.
5. Yeah. So the pressure is very high. What do you see for the near future in terms of oil companies and prices and this whole energy situation?
Well, on price, the price for oil is going to go up. It'll be up and down. It won't be on a straight line progression. It's down a little bit today, but the pressure is in an upwards direction, and that's not going to change. And case in point, on that lease sale, these companies are frightened. They're afraid. The ESG investor community controls trillions of dollars in capital. And the ESG investor community doesn't want these companies to be drilling more wells for oil and gas. And so we are creating, through government policy and through the intimidation tactics of the ESG investor community, we're creating an artificial shortage of crude oil on the global market. And the OPEC Plus cartel plays a role in that as well. And we're creating a shortage of natural gas supply, and it's artificial on the global market. The reserves of oil and gas in the ground are massive, huge, enough to supply the world for centuries to come. But it requires capital to do that. And when you can't have access to capital, which is what the CEO of Pioneer Natural Resources talked about last week, then you're not going to go out and activate more drilling rigs and drill more wells, because you don't want to be punished by your investors and by the news media. And so these management teams are very intimidated right now. And, as long as that's the case, we're going to have higher and higher prices for oil and natural gas and coal as well.
Yeah, coal is the same. Yeah, it's very similar to the Nord 2 with the Canada pipeline from Canada to the United States. So they are. And is there anything that we can do? Leaders can do in terms of transform this pressure and this situation to be something smooth for the future?
Well, I think that you and I can keep talking about it and writing about it and doing what we do. We need more people willing to honestly talk about it. Journalists are intimidated as well by the green community every day. I have intimidation every day from them. But you have to be willing to continue to do that. And, I think as consumers increasingly make the connections between what's happening in this energy transition and what they're paying for products at the grocery store, because there is a direct one-on-one relationship between them, then consumers need to wake up and start punishing policymakers for following the orders, basically, of the green community and the news media, which is what's been happening. And that's especially true among the Republicans. The Democratic Party is not going to have that happen to them because that's their voter base is in favor of all that. But it's especially true among Republicans. When you get into primaries, you need to take a look at the real voting records of the incumbents. And if they have been voting in favor of these kinds of things that are creating these artificial shortages and dramatically increasing what you pay for literally everything, then you need to vote for the other guy. And that's the only way any of this will change, is if policymakers really start to feel some pain for making, these policy decisions that are really, really doing us great economic harm.
You mentioned something very interesting. I mean, supply chains are very connected to energy offerings. How do you connect to those two things?
Oh, yeah. And, and a lot of that, the supply chains are critical to everything, but when you have ports that can't land ships, we have Port of Long Beach at the end of August had 73 ships sitting out there waiting to land, container ships and oil tankers. Same thing happening in Galveston and Port of Corpus Christi and, all along the United States coast due to, quote, worker shortages caused by, quote, COVID, which is really worker shortages. They're real, but they're caused by government policy actions, paying people more to stay home and collect unemployment benefits that they can make if they go to work, things like that. These two are artificial, and these supply chain issues are mainly artificial, results of bad policy decisions. And I'm talking to an expert on all that tomorrow for an interview for a Forbes piece, and we'll learn more about that. But yeah, the supply chain issue is, and the other side of that is, supply chains involve transportation, and the fuel for transportation for 98% of the movement of goods is fossil fuels, and the price of that's going up. So that's also increasing the cost to everybody for all of these goods. Yeah. So it's just this cycle that feeds on itself, and it's really a terrible situation.
Yeah, that's perfect. Perfect. People, let me say that I suggest do not miss David LinkedIn's posts, and the Forbes texts are very interesting. So who can follow David, I suggest that's a good choice.
And just David, a shameless plug, I'm also the editor of Shale Magazine. Shalemag.com is the website, and we have a lot of good content there as well.
Shale,
as like the Barnett Shale. Shale Mag. SHALEMAG.com.
Okay, that's great. Yeah. Thank you, David. It was a pleasure to talk to you today.
Hey, it's always a pleasure, Armando. Thank you for having me on.
Thank you. Have a good day.